Next, let's speak to Daisy Jeffry. She is lead organiser for School Strike for Climate Australia. And she's speaking to us from inside COP25 in Madrid. That is, of course, where Matt was speaking to us from as well. Welcome to the programme, Daisy. Good to speak to you.
Great to speak to you.
And thanks for taking a bit of time out to speak to us. I know that you're super busy there as well. Now, you took part in an occupation of the stage today at COP25. Tell us about it and why you chose to do it.
Coming here, this is my fourth day here, and what I've seen is so much talk and so little action. So many politicians are happy to get up and talk about how supposedly amazing their country is, including my own country of Australia. And yet it seems to just be a political play to try and get out of actually reducing emissions. And so what we saw this as, we saw no alternative. Our other actions were not cutting through. Yes, they were getting media. We needed to do something drastic and something very against the UN rules. So today we decided that after Greta's panel, we would occupy the stage to make a real statement that what is happening right now is not good enough, that we desperately need action. We all came in and we sat down at the conference, and I think we were all very nervous about getting debadged, but we knew that we had to do this because if we don't get media attention, if we don't keep attention on climate, then why are we here? And so there was a fence between us and the stage, and we ducked under the fence, and then security tried to stop us, and we pushed past security. It was probably the scariest thing I've done in my life, and I say that as a white person. I have an enormous amount of privilege. And we climbed up onto the stage, and we held hands together, and we sang. And this, keep in mind, we're school kids from around the world, and we've come together. Most of us have only known each other for a couple of days. We've come together in solidarity. Kids from around the world saying that we need climate action, and yet our politicians cannot come together and do the same.
And Daisy, I'm going to play devil's advocate here, pushing your way onto stage, holding hands, singing. What impact do you think that has?
I think for us, it was a bit of a novelty effect impact in the sense that it would get some traction in the media. However, it was not a violent protest. Singing, like the idea of singing and chanting together, you have to be careful in the way that you do it. But it is a pretty powerful thing. And the way we did it to identify and call out politicians for the lack of action, the fact that we still have to have people getting up on stage protesting, particularly the youth, is a real indication of how bad things are going here at the COP.
And it's important to stress that you are only 17. You've come a very long way to make your voice heard. You mentioned Greta Thunberg there. Have you met her personally?
I actually met her today on stage.
How was that? That's one place to meet.
Yeah, well, we were, because we were taking part in the action, and I think, Greta is very conscious that there's a bit of Greta mania going on where people are treating her as a celebrity rather than an activist. And she wanted to make sure that she wasn't at the centre of the action. So she took a step back and she was sitting around the back, and I turned around and asked her if she was okay, and she smiled and nodded. And that is just about the only interaction I've had with her.
But Daisy, it's important to highlight that you have often been compared to Greta Thunberg. How does that make you feel?
I think it's kind of hilarious. What we see is quite a few young women across the US, Europe, and in Australia. We get called whichever countries, Greta Thunberg, and I think it's just easier to identify us that way, particularly with a mainstream audience, because people know Greta, and so once you identify someone with her, it makes them a more recognisable figure, I am assuming. I do think it's a bit funny though.
Daisy, you're over in Madrid protesting there, but back home in Sydney, in Australia rather, there are wildfires taking place, prematurely many would say, incredibly intense. How do you feel about them?
I live in Sydney, and my city is suffocating. We can't see anything, we can't breathe, people cannot go outside, ash is falling from the sky, and our Prime Minister has not even made a statement about it. In fact, he refuses to pay our firefighters, saying that he said that they actually want to be there at the fire front, which is absolutely ridiculous. And yet Sydney is lucky because north west and south of Sydney, everything is burning. Koalas are going extinct. It is a really horrific thing to see so many people lose their homes. Some people have even lost their lives, and yet our government still staunchly refuses to take climate action.
And what do you want them to do?
I want them to take adequate action. Right now, our policy is beyond inadequate. Instead of actually trying to even reduce emissions at all, we are trying to get out of reducing our emissions and being held accountable by trying to get our credits passed over. The idea of, I think what gets thrown around a lot by politicians is the idea of net neutrality. People often hear we will reach net zero emissions by 2030 or 2050. That net idea is a total myth. So it's the idea that in one place, if you are still emitting a lot of CO2 emissions, but in another place they're emitting less, that it balances out. It's a total myth. It doesn't mean that we're actually reducing emissions. It just means that richer countries get away with emitting more into the atmosphere and then claiming that it is okay. And so that's what my country is currently doing. School Strike for Climate actually has 3 demands. 100% renewable energy and exports by 2030, no new coal, oil or gas, including the Adani Carmichael mine, and number 3, fund a just transition for fossil fuel workers and communities affected by the climate crisis. And so those are the demands that we have for our politicians. However, being at the COP here, I'm not hopeful. The behaviour I've seen by politicians here has been disgraceful. They don't want to listen to young people. They don't want to listen to scientists. They will, however, listen to lobbyists. And there's so much talking here and there is no action, and it is incredibly frustrating for the youth here because our future is being gambled with. Yeah, so that would be my perspective.
Daisy, let me just give you a couple of lines which you may well know of from Scott Morrison, your leader there in Australia. He said that the government's climate change policy was in the, I quote, sensible centre of balancing environmental and economic needs and was meeting emissions reduction targets. Our actions on climate change are getting the results they're intended to get. What's your reaction?
Well, if the results he's talking about are non-existent, then sure, they're the results that the government intends. The idea that we are getting adequate climate action is a total myth. I mean, I think something that's worth noting is that with only a couple of days' notice, 32,000 people went out into the streets of Sydney yesterday demanding that the government take stronger climate action to battle these fires. And, you know, Australians, we tend to not protest. We're very anti-authority. We're not very interested in politics. But climate change is now affecting Australians all across Australia, in the cities, in the regional and rural communities, and we are sick of it. And we cannot, you know, it's all very well for this government to sit in our capital city of Canberra and sit in their offices and look out the window and think that everything is okay. But for those of us who are actually out in the streets suffocating and burning, we have had enough and we will not stand for this anymore.
Daisy, good to speak to you. It's hard to imagine that you are only 17, speaking like an expert there, and I cannot remember myself being so vocal and passionate at such a young age. We do wish you all the best. That's Daisy Jeffry.